Yeshiva world.
Who's gonna be the next president? I can hear you. Que she's gonna be quien va a ser la próxima presidenta de este país. No se oye, no hablamos español. Otra vez. ¿Quién será la próxima presidenta? So you know, the person that will be speaking on her behalf is someone that knows our community very well. He is very grateful of this hospital because this hospital has been here for him, and he also been very grateful of Dominicans. Last December, both Hillary and Bill spent the holiday in the Dominican Republic. So a quien vamos a escuchar es una persona que estará hablando a nombre de Hillary como la próxima presidenta, que conoce bien a este hospital lo ha tratado a él, conoce a los dominicanos, tanto Hillary como Bill estuvieron allá en los días de fiesta en diciembre pasado. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the former president and the person we're working so hard to elect our great next president, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton.
First of all, that guy has really cool sunglasses there. Thank you so much for coming out on this beautiful afternoon.
I love you, Bill.
Oh, is this working? Thank, first of all, Councilman Idanis Rodriguez and his beautiful daughter, Risa, and my longtime friend, Guillermo Linares, and Maria Luna, the Vice Chair of the New York State Democratic Council. They were for me, the latter two, when I ran for president so early that only my mother thought I could win. Hillary and Chelsea were still undecided. This is a beautiful day. And it reminds us that every day we get a chance to make a new beginning. And that's what it's time for America to do. I don't agree that we ever stop being great, but we did stop being bold. We need to grow together again. We need to live together again. We need to be citizens together. That's what this is about, and that's what I want to talk to you about. You know, in the debate last night, afterward there was CNN had a group of New Yorkers. And they said after the debate, only 9 of 200 were undecided, but there was one person who changed his vote. So he walks over, the commentator, I think it was Anderson Cooper or someone, walked over, and this African-American man stood up. Now. So anyway, I don't know how old he was because everybody's younger than me now. But he was young. I would say mid to late 30s, and he said, I changed my vote. He said, I changed to Hillary for a simple reason. He said, I heard this debate, and her opponents seemed more focused on the past, and she talked about the future. And this election should be about the future. Every day we get to make a new beginning. We have to decide. And I think there are 3 big issues in this race. One is, who's got the best ideas to make the future? 2 is, who's best prepared to implement those ideas at home and around the world, because there are a lot of troubles around the world. And the 3rd is, who's the best change maker? So, to me, if those are the 3 issues, the answer is clear. And I'd like to talk about them each in turn. First of all, we had a lot of Dominican Americans here. Right? And we have Asian Americans here. We have people from all over the world here. If you look at this crowd, you see the future of this country. When the president gave his last State of the Union address, he said, we still have troubles in America, but you should be optimistic because we're the best performing big economy in the world, because we have more than 90% of our people with health insurance for the first time in history, worth saying here in Columbia, where my daughter once did an internship, and down the road she teaches public health at the Mailman School at Columbia. He said, we got the youngest, most diverse workforce of any big economy in the world. And having lost it, I can tell you, youth matters to the economic future of a country. He said, we got the best science and technology base. We have the best system of education and training. We just need to make college more affordable and the debt more manageable. We are doing fine. Embrace the future. We rank first or second in the world in every scientific survey of the ability of nations to generate more and more of their power from the sun, from the wind, from other renewable resources. Now, here's the problem that explains the intensity in this election. 80% of the people in this country have still not gotten a pay raise since the crash, when you adjust for inflation. That has created all kinds of problems. About half the people are living on what they were living on 15 years ago, the last day I was president. That creates all kinds of problems. Meanwhile, the cost of education, for example, has continued to rise. So more and more young people have to borrow money to go to college, and then they feel they won't be able to pay it back. Adonis, our assemblyman, was once in Occupy Wall Street because he knew that inequality was aggravated by the crash. First, the concentration of wealth at the top, when in 2001 we returned to trickle-down economics. And second, by the absence of proper regulation in the Securities and Exchange Commission and the bank regulators. Now, New York is coming back. One of the top growing economies in the United States, and there are at least 50,000 fewer people working on Wall Street. And the Wall Street Journal even yesterday admitted that it is because the banks are making fewer gambles and more investments in an old-fashioned way in this community and in communities throughout the country so we can grow together again. Because the Dodd-Frank law, which President Obama signed, I think the second most important bill after the health care law, will stop Wall Street from wrecking Main Street. Inequality is still a big problem, but the main driver of inequality today, well, there are two. One is we don't have enough education and training to make sure there is equal opportunity for the jobs of tomorrow. It does ask me, first of all, to mention this. There is gross underrepresentation of Latinos, African Americans, and women in all the STEM fields. When President Obama asked for 100,000 more STEM teachers, and this Congress didn't want to give it to him, I got 24 partners together, and we raised enough money to fill 30% of the gap. That's important. We should be preparing more people. Every time I meet an elementary school student who is either from an immigrant family or is African American, is long-time Hispanic, or a young girl, I say, what's your favorite course? There is better than a 50-50 chance they will all say math. Something happens between the time they give me that answer and the time they're ready to go into the workforce. We've got to change it, and Hillary will invest more money in preparing young people from all backgrounds, and both men and women, in these STEM fields. We've got to do that. That will help a lot on this inequality. The second and bigger problem right now is that corporations that are held by stockholders used to believe that they owed obligations more or less equally to their customers, their employees, the communities they were a part of, and their stockholders. Believe it or not, there are still some companies that believe that. Companies with good profit-sharing plans. Companies that give a big percentage of their annual profits back to their employees and the communities. And believe it or not, over any 5 to 10 year period, they make more money than these companies that squeeze every last drop of blood out of their employees to drive the stock price up, so all these active shareholders can sell their stock in a year and a day and get lower tax treatment. But it keeps happening. So Hillary said we need a system of carrots and sticks. Stop giving people lower tax rates for just holding an investment for a year and a day. Make them hold it longer before they can get the taxes dropped. And don't drop them all the way till they've held the investment at least 5 years. Then give these same companies a 15% tax credit if they share their earnings fairly with their employees and the companies of which they are a part. That addresses the current problem. Both those things. Now let's talk a little bit about access to the education and training you need. She has proposed, I think, by far the best plan. First, it spends a lot of money on training for people who don't need a 4-year college degree to get a good middle-class job with a good prospect of future advancement. Apprenticeship programs. Various community college training programs. That's important. And especially a lot of money to help young people who need help to get that first job and start their careers. Then, for 4-year colleges, she proposes free tuition for everyone who needs it, not just at public 4-year colleges, but at private schools that disproportionately serve first-generation immigrants, Hispanics, African Americans, low-income working people, if they have moderate tuition and high graduation rates. I was in such a college in the Bronx this morning, a small Catholic school with students from all over the world and from all ethnic groups in New York. High graduation rate, moderate tuition, serving the targeted population. They should all be part of it. But the idea is pay tuition for everybody that needs it. For lower income people, give them more help. Have a huge increase in the Pell Grants so that you can cover not only materials, but living expenses. Then, add to that, enough work study slots so that everybody who needs more can get 10 hours a week of work study on the campus. That's one thing we can do to help hold down the cost of higher education, and as nearly as I can see, about the only thing the federal government can do to help restrain cost. She believes people can afford to pay the tuition, or their parents should pay it. Because when you raise taxes on upper income people, we need that money to create good jobs for America's future. A modern infrastructure program, a modern program to lead the world in solar and wind and other clean technologies. I'll just give you one example that affects the work that is done here. There are many more places than Flint, Michigan, where children have elevated lead levels in their blood because of rusty pipes that should have been replaced decades ago. If you tore them all up, you create a lot of good jobs that can't be exported, and you guarantee all our children a healthy future. That's at the core of her infrastructure program. And the other thing is, people who live in areas smaller than New York often don't have access to rapid, affordable broadband. That also is infrastructure. If you gave it to every community in America, overnight they would all be part of the national and the global economy, and we could all rise together. This is important. So you have to both reduce inequality and increase opportunity. The federal government's main opportunities to create more jobs are in infrastructure, clean energy, 500 million solar panels in the next 4 years, and every American home able to run entirely on clean energy in 8 years. That's a pretty ambitious goal. It would be easy to do. Now, I know somebody here is saying, that'd be a good speech if you gave it to California. And it is true that California leads America in the number of installed solar panels. But guess what? Who knows what the number 2 state is? New Jersey. New Jersey. We can do this everywhere. Germany, after all, gets the most electricity from the sun of any country, and the sun shines there on average about as much as it does in Alaska or London. We can do this. When Hillary was Secretary of State, relevant to a lot of the roots here, she sponsored an attempt to make the Caribbean completely energy independent, to maximize solar, to maximize wind. If we'd been able to complete that in Puerto Rico, a lot of this bankruptcy problem would not exist today, and we owe it to them to give them an independent clean energy future, because they're part of the United States, and they need that and equal reimbursement for health care, as well as a fair work out of this debt, and we'd be a long way down the road. That's part of her program too. The third thing that we can do is bring manufacturing jobs back. I was in the Bronx today, they're growing manufacturing jobs. Labor is not a big part of manufacturing costs today in modern manufacturing compared to materials, energy, and transportation. The argument's simple. We got the biggest market in the world. We might as well make this stuff here. That's why in the most forward-looking state that we've had an election in so far, Ohio, that had an old manufacturing base, still has an enormous percentage of the auto jobs. She won a victory greater than twice what any of the polls showed, because they knew she stood for a modern manufacturing policy that would bring jobs back to America. The fourth thing we had to do, that anybody who walks up and down the streets of Manhattan knows, is not to forget that 2/3 of all jobs are created by small businesses. And when we reacted to the crash, we made a lot of rules to stop the big banks at the top from speculating. But some regulators all over the country were afraid of any kind of loans being made. They didn't want the banks to fail. So there's still too many restraints on small businesses. The law says that community banking is not covered by these new regulations, and the Community Reinvestment Act requires that any bank in America that takes deposits from anybody has to loan money in that area. It's time to enforce that law again, and she will do it, and we will create a lot of small businesses in the country. Now, then you have to remove the barriers to participating. And they talked about a couple of them in the debate last night. We need a serious effort to let all these young people out of prison who have served too long for nonviolent offenses. But as she pointed out last night, if you're going to do that, you got to give these young people education, training, job placement assistance, and say they cannot be denied jobs because they were once in jail. They need to start again so we can all rise together. And I'll tell you something I think everybody here can identify with. New York, I'm proud to say, has, I think, the best prison education programs in America. And one of the most active is run by a graduate of Bard College with the support of Bard College. One of their prison debate teams a couple of months ago defeated the Harvard debate team in a debate. Right after they had defeated the West Point debate team. Look, we can't stand to have all this talent bottled up. We need to let these people out of prison so they can go to work and help us build an America where we all rise together. She believes that. We also need equal pay, paid leave, and affordable child care so more women can join the workforce and succeed in raising their children too. You got to tear the barriers down. But we have to realize that for many people now, accelerating and completing an education, the biggest barrier is the cost. So it's fine to pay the tuition and let everybody graduate debt-free now. What about all these people that have debt? When I was president, we passed the biggest college aid program since the GI Bill at the end of World War II. 10 million more people got an education. Then the cost of college wiped away the benefits. Then President Obama gets elected. He passed an even bigger program and said anybody could borrow money from the federal government and pay it back as a fixed percentage of your income. And a lot of the benefits are gone. Why? because the cost kept rising and the states couldn't keep up, and they wanted to fund the public schools. Or they just wanted to give it away in tax cuts, depending on what state it was. But I was over the moon when the New York legislature and the governor announced they were finally going to start putting more money back into the state university and the city university systems. So what happens? More and more and more of these places are having to raise tuition. And more students are borrowing money from ordinary banks. So what should we do about that? Here's Hillary's plan. First of all, a college loan is the only loan you cannot refinance. That's crazy. New York is full of people who refinance their home mortgages. I met a woman just a couple of weeks ago that I've done business with for years, whose son just graduated. So she refinances her home mortgage at under 4%, and her son owns a college loan at 9%. If you let everybody refinance their loan tomorrow, 25 million young people would save an average of more than $2,000 apiece. That's where we should start. Then, Hillary believes, and just think about your own experience now. Hillary believes that if you can get a home mortgage for 20 to 30 years, because it's a lifetime investment, you should be able to turn your college debt, no matter how much it is, into a mortgage and pay it back over 20 years if you want, at a variable rate, but never ever, even if you owe $200,000, never more than 10% of your after-tax income. Now think what this would do. First, you can move out of your parents' house. Second, but was more personally rewarding, you could take it because your loan payment would go down. Third, if you dreamed all your life of going into business, and let's say starting an organic bakery in Washington Heights, and it only cost you $80,000 to start, you could go borrow the money because this wouldn't count against your credit score. And if, like most businesses, you don't make any money the first year, your debt payment would go down. It would actually help people to qualify to start their own course. And we could all rise together. This would liberate the energies of millions of people. It's a very, very important thing to do. But we got to do these things together. We need immigration reform badly. We got 11.5 million people who are undocumented in this country. Now I know in the other party, one of their candidates says, vote for me, I'll send them home and you can have their jobs. That will break up families that affect 16 million Americans. It's not right, and it is really dumb economics.
Excuse me, sir.
Because our diversity and our youth make us strong. What we need to do is to go back and do what we should have done in 2007, when Hillary is the only candidate in this race who voted for Senator Kennedy's immigration reform bill, in spite of the pleas of the farm workers and all the other immigrant advocates, and the last time we had a Republican president who would actually sign an immigration reform bill. And that opportunity slipped from our grasp. We can't let it happen again. We got to pass immigration reform and just lift this cloud from people and get on about the business of the executive orders President Obama is following to protect children and the parents of children and not break up these families. So if you take down the barriers and you create the opportunities, we can all rise together. There are other barriers, but I could keep you here till tomorrow morning. She knows what they are, and you can read about them on our website. I'll give you one, since we're at the health center, I think it's worth thinking about. The fastest growing consumer group in the entire United States are people with disabilities. And yet they are still regularly denied access to the workplace, even though they get to keep their Medicaid when they go to work, and even though they're almost never absent and have a record of very high productivity in jobs for which they are able to complete. We need to do this. We need to all rise together. Then we need to live together with inclusive policies. Hillary thinks it is a terrible mistake to continue this tirade saying we should not let any more Muslims in our country when the moderate Muslims in America are our key to winning the fight over the social media for the hearts and minds of billions of people around the world. And look, I never will forget, after 9/11, when Hillary was a senator and she had to rush back to Washington to try to begin to get the money for New York to begin. And that's another reason, by the way, this Supreme Court appointment is so important. We don't need any more 5-4 decisions on Citizens United. If they won't turn it over, Hillary said we ought to have a constitutional amendment to change that rule. It's terrible. Saying a billionaire and a minimum wage worker have equal rights to spend whatever they want to on politics. That's a crazy idea. We don't need any more assault on voting rights. We need a Supreme Court that will expand voting rights, not restrict them. In Phoenix, Arizona, they were under the voting rights law. She won the primary in Arizona in spite of this. But listen to this. There was in all of Arizona, in every county, one voting place for every 2,100 voters, except in the capital, Maricopa County, where Phoenix is, which is the most Democratic county in the state. There was one voting place for every 20,000 people. You couldn't make this up. This is happening all over America. We need a Supreme Court that will stand up for voting rights, and will stand up for equal treatment of all citizens, and will stand up for labor rights, that will stand up for women's rights, that will stand up for the proposition that we have to all rise together. So that's my pitch. I think her ideas are the best. Second, she's the only person who can go in there on the first day and deal with all these national security challenges. Just think what would happen if we started growing like crazy and our income started going up, but Europe was so overwhelmed by the Syrian refugee crisis that their economy started crashing. Everybody started running out of the EU. 2 countries that America helped to save in the Cold War, Poland and Hungary, have now decided they'd rather have governments more like Mr. Putin's Russia because they're scared of people who don't look like them. They're overwhelmed. We need someone who can make people think again and do what's right for all of us again so we can all rise together. And the last thing I'm going to tell you is she's the best single change maker I ever saw. And that's really why all these senators and congressmen and governors have endorsed her. I know, one of the few things I really haven't enjoyed about this primary, I think it's fine that all these young students have been so enthusiastic for her opponent and sound so good. Just shoot every third person on Wall Street and everything will be fine. But the truth is there are 50,000 fewer people there today. The Dodd-Frank Act is working. The inequality problem is rooted in the shareholder first mentality and the absence of training for the jobs of tomorrow. But the real reason, therefore, is because she is a change maker. I almost fell out of my chair last night. I don't know if you saw this debate. When her opponent said, well, yeah, she cleaned my clock in the South. What do you expect? Those are the most conservative parts of America. Not Florida. It's one of the most diverse places in America. They just believe in the future and they know how real change is made. Not North Carolina, one of the most diverse places in the country. They understand the threat of people who want to take away their voting rights, and they do not believe that the president lost the Congress because he wasn't left-wing enough. Not Arkansas, where Hillary hadn't lived in a long, long time now. They still voted for her more than 2-1 because they know she's a change maker. In Alabama, a friend of mine who spent 40 years in the civil rights movement called and said, did she really get 93% of the African-American vote in Alabama? I said, yeah. He said, that doesn't make any sense. I said, oh, yes, it does. And he said, well, tell me about it. He said, when she was a young student, when she got out of Yale Law School, she turned down all these fancy clerkships and all these big jobs and went to work for the Children's Defense Fund. They sent her to South Carolina to examine why African-American teenagers are being held in prisons with adults for years and years and having their lives ruined. She filed a report to the Children's Defense Fund, and it began to change the whole juvenile justice system in that state and in the South. They know that. What is the relevance of that to people who know how hard change is? Past performance is an indicator of future performance. And in Alabama, she did something that's truly amazing 43 years ago. She goes to this little town in Alabama that has one of these so-called private academies. Everybody knew they were just perpetuating the illegal segregated school system, but it hadn't been proved. And they were all taking tax credits, so the rest of us were financing what they were doing. So Hillary shows up, marches into the school, and says her husband has just gotten a job in town. They have a child. They want to know if they should enroll in the school. The guy makes them the usual play. She said, look, let's just cut to the chase here. If my boy goes to this school, will he be in an all-white school, yes or no? And the guy said, absolutely. She had him. She had them. They lost their tax exemption. And they lost them all over Alabama. And eventually they lost them all over the South, because she always finds a way to make something good happen. And they thought in Alabama that past performance was a pretty good indicator of future performance. My senator from Arkansas was defeated in the 2014 election. I had known him since he was a boy. His father was a senator and a governor, and one of my closest friends. He's one of the few people who knowingly laid down his job to get over 90% of the people with health insurance. He doesn't believe that we lost the Congress because people didn't think we were left-wing enough. And he's a wonderful man. He had cancer as a child. And he used to say, look, I knew I was going to get beat because Fox News is the main TV channel down there now, and because the states moved way to the right. But I loved being a senator, but I couldn't look myself in the eye every morning for the rest of my career thinking that I was alive because my family had good health insurance and I had denied that same chance at life to poor children. So I gave it up. And he said this. He said, here's my speech. I know both these candidates. I like them both. I have served with them both. But if you really want to get something done, you better make Hillary the president, because I never saw anybody better at doing that. So I ask you on Tuesday to help make Hillary the president. Just one little political science remark. New York is the only big state in America that has a presidential-only primary. In every other state that has a primary, they have congressional elections, they have city council elections, they have assembly elections. Only we do that. And it means it's harder to increase awareness of just how important this is. 8 years ago, when she and President Obama had a great race, it was hotly contested in New York. We had a record turnout. She won. In Illinois, his home state, he won. Fair enough. But New York is 50% bigger than Illinois. Yet Illinois cast 50% more votes over our record turnout just because they had local elections. Now you, the young people here especially, you got a lot riding on this election. Those of you with more tomorrows than yesterdays, you don't care any more about your future than I do, but you're going to have more of it. And I just ask you not only to support her, but to ask other people. Talk about this is important. We got to grow together. We got to live together. We got to be citizens together. Every place inclusion is the order of the day. Good things are happening. Every place people allow organized centers that grab too much of the pie, and every place people think what's different about them is more important than what we have in common, good things are not happening. We've got a remarkable opportunity. The President's last State of the Union address was right. We are just this close to growing again together, and we don't want to blow it. So please go out there and put one in for her on Tuesday. God bless you. Thank you.
That way you don't know what truck he's